Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good evening and welcome to the last lap. This is a special series that we have started in the run-up to your Prelims 2024. I'm sure many of you would be revising all the topics as the Prelims is fast approaching, and our intention was to launch a short program through which we could quickly revise and cover the most important topics which could help you in the upcoming prelims. Of course, we already conducted a free crash course, that is Conquer Prelims, through which we covered a number of static topics and current affairs topics. But apart from what we have covered, there could be many more topics as UPSC syllabus is almost endless. And UPSC also tends to surprise us by taking up few obscure topics as well. So the intention of the Last Lap series is to help you revise some of the topics that we have already discussed, along with some of the remaining topics, the obscure topics, which we may not have touched upon. Just stay with me for the next 1 hour, and I promise to cover more than 20 conventions, treaties, agreements, protocols from international relations and also from economy and environment and ecology, which can be very important for your upcoming prelims. I have carefully curated these topics for today's session. I have gone through the current affairs of the last 2 years to select the 20 most important topics. This would be the easiest form of revision for you, and this series will continue till the 14th of June. We have already conducted 2 sessions on history, where Abhishek sir has covered ancient, medieval and modern India through timelines. And today I'm discussing some important conventions and treaties. Tomorrow, I'll be taking up some of the important reports and organizations, and so on and so forth. The series will continue till the 14th of June, covering economy, environment, and as well as polity related topics. So do join us live every day till the 14th at 7 p.m. for a quick revision of all the important topics for your upcoming exam. Now, in return, all we expect from you is to support us through your likes, through your comments, and if you're benefiting from the initiative, do subscribe to our channel, because we are going to bring many more such initiatives to help you crack the UPSC Civil Services examination. So let's start with the first topic, the WTO Agreement on Fisheries Subsidies. This agreement was brought out through the 12th Ministerial Conference in 2022. And I feel the topic is still very relevant because India has completely supported the WTO Agreement on Fishery Subsidies. Now, this agreement is very unique. It stands out amongst the various international agreements that we have seen in the last couple of years, because this is the only international agreement through a multilateral platform like WTO, which helps in meeting the objectives of a sustainable development goal. If you look at SDG number 14, target number 14, it deals with life below water. It calls upon the countries to work together to protect marine life, marine organisms and marine biodiversity. And under this target, target 14, there is sub-target number 6. So essentially SDG 14.6. It calls for an end to these harmful subsidies provided by few governments, which has contributed to overfishing in some of the most important fishing grounds in the world. Overfishing, even illegal fishing, unregulated, unreported fishing is a major environmental threat that poses a danger for marine biodiversity. Several governments, especially in some developed countries and also in some developing, underdeveloped countries, to support the fishing community, they provide subsidies so that they can procure fast-moving boats. They can procure bottom trawlers, mechanized trawlers, through which they can increase the catch. Even though it can bring more profits and secure the livelihood of fishermen, it leaves behind environmental damage and destruction. Because several non-edible fish also get caught through the bottom trawling method, it can deplete the fish stock available, and it doesn't allow nature enough time to replenish the fishing stock. So as a result, under SDG, goal number 14, target number 6, the UN gave a call for ending these illegal forms of fishing or unregulated, unsustainable forms of fishing that were being subsidized by governments. So to realize this goal, through the WTO, at the 12th Ministerial Conference, an international agreement on fisheries subsidies was adopted. So that is why the topic is very important. It is the first SDG target to have been fully met through an international agreement. And also it's the first time that there is a WTO agreement related to an environmental issue. After the Doha agreement, this happens to be the second agreement reached at the WTO, and it's the first time that WTO is looking at an environmental issue and it has secured an agreement. So if you look at some of the key provisions, it prohibits providing any form of subsidies for illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. Fishing which is not regulated by the respective states. Fishing being carried out in illegal fishing grounds. All such activities are prohibited, and it prohibits the governments from providing any kind of state support, any kind of fiscal support to such illegal, unregulated forms of fishing. It also prohibits subsidies for fishing vessels which contribute to overfishing. It is a reference to unsustainable fishing methods like bottom trawling. And it also prohibits the provision of subsidies for fishing in the high seas. The high seas are present beyond the jurisdiction of any country. It's part of international waters, and it's beyond the exclusive economic zones of all the countries. So high seas does not belong to any specific country, it belongs to the global commons. So fishing in the high seas is regulated, and providing subsidies for such fishing is prohibited through this WTO agreement. But however, it does not prohibit developmental subsidies which are provided for the upliftment of the fishing communities, especially developing countries, underdeveloped countries. They do provide subsidies for the fishing community to help them sustain their livelihood, to support their livelihood. So such developmental subsidies will be exempted, and the credit goes to India for securing an exemption for developing and underdeveloped countries. India pushed for the inclusion of polluter pays principle and the CBDR principle, which we had earlier used under the Climate Change Convention. And these important principles were pushed by India, and eventually they were incorporated into this agreement on fisheries subsidies. Because when it comes to fisheries subsidies, it's the developed countries which have largely given subsidies in the 70s and 80s, and they are largely responsible for overexploitation, for overfishing. So developing and underdeveloped countries deserve their space to support their fishing community through subsidies. Because the large marine destruction which has taken place due to overfishing and illegal fishing, it has happened through developed nations because of the massive subsidies they have given over the decades. So they are the ones responsible for the large-scale marine destruction, and hence we have invoked the polluter pays principle. Essentially, we are accounting for historical responsibilities, very similar to how historical emissions were accounted under the Climate Change Convention. And we push the CBDR principle, common but differentiated responsibilities. The goal is common for everyone, but the amount of effort we'll put in to end these subsidies will be differentiated based on the developmental status of that country. So because of these efforts by India, we got a transition period of 2 years after this agreement comes into force. Now this agreement will come into force once it receives 2/3 support from the member countries of WTO. And after it comes into force, the developing nations, underdeveloped nations will get a 2-year transition period. They'll get additional time to implement this prohibition on fishery subsidies. So meaning, it will first apply on developed countries who will be obligated to ban or prohibit all these subsidies which are hazardous for marine environment. And after 2 years of transition period, then developing and underdeveloped countries will also implement the prohibition on fishery subsidies. So the topic is very important. A prelims question can be easily designed based on all these points and facts. For example, UPSC might give you 2-3 statements based on what we have discussed, and it might ask you to check how many of the statements are correct. So without understanding the background and also the analysis regarding CBDR principle and polluter pays principle, you won't be able to answer this question. So please be prepared for such questions. And now before I take up the next topic, we have a very important announcement, especially for 2025 aspirants. If any of you, if you're preparing seriously for the next attempt, and if you want quality classes from the best educators, we are here to help you. New English batch and English batch is just starting, and we are offering a great price offer as the new batches are beginning. The courses are available for a 15-month subscription at just a price of 25,000 rupees. And the offer ends today because the English batch has just begun yesterday and the bilingual English batch is starting in a few days. So do make sure you use the offer and enroll for the classroom program to ensure that you get the best content and the best guidance possible to help you crack the 2025 attempt. Now let's look at the next topic. We will be discussing the Vienna Convention, Montreal Protocol under the Vienna Convention, and the Kigali Amendment or the Kigali Agreement under the Montreal Protocol. This topic, even though it's a very old topic, I feel it's very important because recently there was a development. A few months ago, the World Meteorological Organization and UN Environment Program, they brought out a report on the status of the ozone hole, on the status of the ozone recovery. As you all know, certain ozone depleting substances such as chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, and even HCFCs, hydrochlorofluorocarbons. These ozone depleting substances, which were largely emitted through refrigerators, air conditioners, and other aerosol cans, sprays, etc., they would release a free chloride particle into the higher reaches of the stratosphere, and eventually they would reach the polar areas where they would interrupt the ozone formation and destruction cycle. Thus, these anthropogenic factors were responsible for destroying the equilibrium with regard to ozone formation and destruction, leading to the expansion of the ozone hole, especially in the South Pole, in the Antarctic. Now, this is extremely dangerous, detrimental, because expansion of the ozone hole would allow harmful UV rays of the sun to enter into the atmosphere, and this has a huge impact on human health and as well as on plants and animals. From various skin conditions to even cancer, skin cancer would become a norm, and these consequences were realized by the global community in the 1980s. By 1980s, the world realized the impact of these ozone depleting substances and how ozone hole was taking shape and how it could impact human health. For the first time in the 80s, there was scientific evidence brought out to indicate the impact of these ozone depleting substances. So this led the global community to get together and they adopted the Vienna Convention in 1985. In 1985, they adopted the Vienna Convention, which created a framework convention for the protection of ozone layer. See, when it comes to international conventions, treaties and agreements, a framework convention is like a skeletal framework. It only defines the broad principles, objectives. It will not give any specific targets or deadlines, or the specifics are not discussed under the framework convention. Based on this convention, then agreements, protocols are negotiated. For example, if you look at UNFCCC, your Climate Change Convention, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. As the name itself tells you, it's a framework convention, meaning it's a broad convention defining the principles and goals with regard to climate change and tackling climate change. Under the framework convention, Kyoto Protocol was adopted. Paris Agreement was signed. So they provide the specific details on how we are going to achieve those goals and targets. So first priority was to have such a framework convention, which was achieved in 1985. To address the depletion of the ozone layer by adopting the Vienna Convention. It laid out the global objective, which was to phase out the ozone depleting substances. So in 1985, this became the first such convention which was universally adopted. Every single country would sign on to it. It would take effect from 1988, and through subsequent negotiations, the Montreal Protocol was worked out under the Vienna Convention. The Montreal Protocol of 1987 provided a specific action plan through which ozone depleting substances could be phased out. It was not possible to immediately transition away from CFCs and HCFCs because that would have a huge economic impact. there was a need to find alternatives which were safer for the ozone layer, which would not contribute to ozone depletion, and then make a scheduled, gradual transition so that we would switch to cleaner alternatives without the economic impact. So developed countries first took up the greater responsibility, as they were largely responsible for the emissions of CFCs and HCFCs, and a greater window was given for developing nations and underdeveloped countries. So eventually, Montreal Protocol got universal support. It was one of the first such international agreements to get universal backing from every single country. And over the years, Montreal Protocol has been very, very successful. Through the Montreal Protocol, CFCs, HCFCs, which were ozone depleting substances, they were replaced with HCFCs, hydrofluorocarbons, which were not ozone depleting in nature. So according to this recent report by WMO and UNEP, Montreal Protocol and Vienna Convention have been a big success. According to the Ozone Recovery Assessment Report brought out by WMO and UNEP, it is evident that ozone layer is back on its track to recovery. The ozone hole has reduced significantly, and over the last 3 decades, more than 3 decades, the global community has done an incredible job at replacing CFCs and HCFCs with HFCs. But however, financing was a challenge. Financing this transition, this phase-out plan was a challenge. For that purpose, a multilateral fund for the implementation of Montreal Protocol was established in 1991, through which finance and technical support was given to developing and underdeveloped countries. Then, this fund has been administered by 4 international agencies. I have listed those international agencies over here. Please take a note of this. There can be a question based on this. Then finally, what is Kigali Amendment or Kigali Agreement? See, when HFCs were adopted as the alternative for CFCs and HCFCs, the global community did not realize that HFCs can be a very potent greenhouse gas. Further studies established that HFCs have a very significant global warming potential. Every molecule of HFC has thousands of times more global warming potential than one molecule of, let's say, carbon dioxide or even methane. So studies established that by the end of the century, HFC emissions alone could contribute to an increase in global average temperature by 0.5 degrees Celsius. So essentially, we went to solve one problem and created one more problem with that. Even though HFCs were non-ozone depleting, it helped in the recovery of the ozone layer. Problem was, it was a greenhouse gas, that too a very potent greenhouse gas. So there was a need for an urgent intervention, which was carried out through Kigali Agreement or Amendment of 2016. This added an amendment to the Montreal Protocol, and right now the world is moving away from HFCs because it is a deadly greenhouse gas. So now it's being replaced with a non-ozone depleting, non-global warming alternative, which will lead us to a safer future. So kindly remember these basic points. There could be a straightforward factual question based on this. Let's look at the next topic, Wassenaar Arrangement. There are a few small topics. I'll go through them quickly because the whole purpose is to ensure that it's a quick revision. Wassenaar Arrangement was in the news because last year India assumed the chairmanship of Wassenaar Arrangement. What is Wassenaar Arrangement? It is an export control regime. It is aimed at preventing the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Wassenaar Arrangement specifically focuses on certain conventional weapons which use dual-use technologies. Dual use refers to any technology or any material which can have a dual purpose. There could be certain technologies which can have a civilian application, and the same technology can be used for a military application to develop conventional weapons, that too WMDs or weapons of mass destruction. So to prevent such sensitive technologies and materials from falling into the wrong hands, a global export control regime was set up called Wassenaar Arrangement in 1996. Today it has 42 members including India. India was the last country to join as a member in 2017. So under Wassenaar Arrangement, there is a control list. It maintains a list of dual-use items, dual-use goods and technologies which are restricted for export. These sensitive technologies can be traded only between the members of Wassenaar Arrangement, and if they have to export it to a non-member, they have to get appropriate approvals. There is a licensing mechanism which regulates the export of these sensitive dual-use goods and technologies. The main objective here was to prevent rogue states and even terrorists and non-state actors from getting hold of civilian technology and turning it for a military purpose. The idea was to prevent the proliferation, the spread of WMDs and such harmful conventional weapons. So since India is a member and we assume the chairmanship, the topic could be very important. Please note it operates on a voluntary basis. Countries have to voluntarily join the initiative and abide by the obligations on a voluntary commitment, and decisions are taken by consensus. So based on these facts, you can expect a prelims question. Now please take a look at the control list that is maintained under Wassenaar Arrangement. There are a list of weapons related technologies and civilian technologies that are listed, from special materials to material processing, electronics, computers, telecommunication, information security including advanced softwares, sensors, aerospace technologies, etc. For example, certain kinds of batteries, certain kinds of metal or alloys which have a civilian purpose but they can be easily turned for a military purpose as well. So such goods, technologies are tightly regulated for exports through the Wassenaar Arrangement. So the members are obligated to bring out national laws and policies in line with the Wassenaar Arrangement and report every transfer and every trade of a dual-use item. Is that clear? Next, we have the Marrakesh Agreement. The Marrakesh Agreement laid the foundation for WTO, the World Trade Organization. Now, why is this important? It is very important because we are marking the 30th anniversary of Marrakesh Agreement. UPSC tends to focus on such milestones, 25th anniversary, 30th anniversary, 50th anniversary. If something happened 20, 30, 50 years ago, such anniversaries hold a lot of significance. Those conventions or treaties or agreements can be asked as a question. WTO is the multilateral platform that we have for facilitating global trade, for creating a fair trading mechanism. And this multilateral trade organization was established through the Marrakesh Agreement in the year 1994, which followed the Uruguay round. The Uruguay round led towards the establishment of WTO, and at Marrakesh, the final agreement was signed, which led to the establishment of WTO in 1995 that replaced the erstwhile trade mechanism called the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, was replaced by the WTO, which was seen as a modern, progressive, multilateral trading system to create a fair mechanism to provide a level playing field for multilateral trade. So it's a small topic, but you should know why Marrakesh Agreement is important. Since it's the 30th anniversary of signing of Marrakesh Agreement, which led to the establishment of WTO, a basic standard question can be expected. Next, topic number 5. UNCTAD has been renamed as UN Trade and Development. I'm sure many of you would have heard about this UN-related agency. UNCTAD stands for United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. This UN-related body has played a pivotal role in promoting trade, in promoting developmental cooperation between various countries, especially between developed and developing countries. Recently, an international agreement was adopted to rename UNCTAD as UN Trade and Development. The word conference was deleted. Now, why is this so important? It is very important because of two reasons. One, it marks the 60th anniversary of establishment of UNCTAD. 2024, this year, marks the 60th anniversary of the organization. India works closely with the UNCTAD, and the word conference here had kept UNCTAD restricted largely to developed countries, which were playing a dominating role when it came to decision making at UNCTAD. By deleting the word conference, a greater space has been opened up for developing and least developed countries to play a bigger role at this UN body And hence the renaming is very significant from India's point of view. As India is seen as a leader of the global south, it becomes very important to understand the significance of this change. So please note down that UN Trade and Development, which is the new name of this UN body, it's a permanent intergovernmental body established in 1964 by the UN General Assembly. It is part of the UN Secretariat. It assists the UN Secretariat, which is the executive arm of the United Nations. It reports to UN General Assembly and also to the ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council, which leads all the welfare programs, the economic initiatives of the United Nations. It is also a member of the UN Development Group that plays a big role in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and it's headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. So these are some basic facts that one should be familiar with as far as UNCTAD is concerned, which is now called UN Trade and Development. Now, the biggest achievement of UNCTAD is the conceptualization and implementation of the GSP, the Generalized System of Preferences, which has also been in the news. In the context of India-US relations, a few years ago when Donald Trump was the president, he engaged in a trade war with many countries, including India, and the US revoked the GSP status for India. Since then, India has been urging US to restore the GSP status. So since this topic is also in the news, there can be a question on UNCTAD because it was UN Conference on Trade and Development which conceptualized the idea of GSP. What is GSP? Under Generalized System of Preferences, developed countries agreed to provide preferential tariffs for developing nations to increase their exports to the developed markets. Let me simplify this. For example, if you take US and India, the US had given India GSP status before. So as a result of the GSP status given by a developed country like US, the exporters in India, the domestic manufacturers, they would enjoy preferential treatment while accessing the American market. So Indian goods, commodities produced in India, especially by our MSME industry, could be exported to the US with very low tariffs, thus giving our exports a competitive advantage. This will allow developing nations like India to capitalize on the access to the developed market, thus increase their exports, create more jobs, and thus drive development in their economies. So GSP was very vital for developing nations, and it was one way through which they could easily access the developed market and get these concessions, these tariff concessions that would support their exports, their domestic industry. So because of all these reasons, the topic can be very, very important. Next, topic number 6, the Outer Space Treaty. Over the last 15 months, this is a topic which has been trending. Because on one hand, we have seen the increasing weaponization of outer space, starting with India's anti-satellite weapon test in 2019. Over the last 4 years, we have seen a new space race beginning, where China has quite aggressively started deploying military assets in space. Russia has reportedly joined the race, and according to reports, a Russian anti-satellite weapon has been closely trailing an American satellite, posing a direct risk between US and Russia, involving potential military implications. Parallelly, there is a new space race that has begun, especially with regard to lunar exploration. India's Chandrayaan mission, China's Chang'e mission, the recent lunar missions of Japan, Russia, and the revival of the Artemis Accords, the Artemis mission by US. It has pushed all the spacefaring nations into a new space race where they are competing for access resources in outer space. Now, this represents a great risk, and in this context, Outer Space Treaty and the related agreements and initiatives become very important for us. So, Outer Space Treaty regulates the exploration of space, the utilization of space. It was adopted during the peak of the Cold War, when a space race had already begun between the then superpowers, US and Soviet Union. So it was adopted in 1967, and it declared outer space as part of the global commons. One of the defining principles of Outer Space Treaty is that it declares that space doesn't belong to anyone. There is no concept of national jurisdiction. No country, no state, no government can claim sovereignty or jurisdiction in outer space. No country can claim the moon belongs to them. No country can claim unilateral rights over, let's say, mineral resources on the moon or any other celestial body for that matter. It has established outer space as a global common that belongs to the whole of humanity. In fact, according to Outer Space Treaty, militarization, stationing of nuclear weapons, or even WMDs on celestial bodies is prohibited. But it does not explicitly prohibit fortification, installations, and militarization, such as usage of anti-satellite weapons. This is not prohibited. That is the reason why few countries, India, China, US, and Russia, they have not only tested, but they have started deploying anti-satellite weapons as well. So militarization is not explicitly prohibited as such, but stationing of nuclear weapons, carrying out weapon testing, using nuclear weapons for a test or WMDs in orbit, this is prohibited in outer space or on any celestial body. But it does not explicitly prohibit militarization or specific anti-satellite tests. Next, it establishes outer space exclusively for peaceful purposes, and it recognizes astronauts as envoys of mankind. According to Outer Space Treaty, astronauts don't just represent their respective nation. They are envoys of mankind. They are representatives of humanity. This is a very important principle that is part of the Outer Space Treaty, and it also mandates the spacefaring nations to take up certain responsibilities. Because when space missions are run, there could be chances that they might cause contamination of outer space, or there could be certain damages caused by a space mission. Because the space debris which might fall back to the Earth might cause environmental damage, or it might cause physical damage leading to loss of lives. So that respective country which is accountable, which is responsible for that particular mission, will be liable for the compensation, the damages to be paid. States are responsible for their respective national space activities, whether it is conducted by a government agency like ISRO or NASA, or whether it's conducted by private space companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, doesn't matter. Whatever space activities are conducted within the jurisdiction of a nation, that government is responsible for it, both in public and private sector. They are responsible for paying for the damages and for any harmful contamination that they might cause. So these are the important principles that you need to keep in mind. And which are the other related treaties and agreements? Let me take you through the related space treaties and agreements. First, we have Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, or CUPUS, signed in 1959. This was the precursor to Outer Space Treaty, which brought out some degree of cooperation between US and Soviet Union. Under this, it was established that space exploration should benefit the whole of humanity, not just benefit few countries and trigger a space race. Next, Outer Space Treaty, which we just discussed, was adopted in 1967. And then the Rescue Agreement of 1968. It obligates all the spacefaring nations to contribute to rescue astronauts if they are ever lost in outer space. If there is ever a mishap or an accident, and if astronauts are trapped in orbit or on a celestial body, it becomes the obligation of every spacefaring nation to contribute to the global effort to rescue the astronauts. Next, Space Liability Convention. Whatever damages, contamination caused by our space mission, that respective government would be liable for the damages and compensation. Launch Registration Convention of 1975. Under this, the countries are supposed to register every space object that they are launching into orbit in a registry maintained at the United Nations. The UN Secretary General, under the UN Secretariat, maintains a list of all the payloads, all the spacecrafts that are stationed in the orbit. Essentially, you have to book a slot for yourself to ensure that there is no collision with other satellites, with other spacecraft. Any mission, any payload stationed in the orbit should be registered, and you need to get the exact orbital slot to prevent any possible collision or risk to other space payloads that are present. Then finally, the Moon Agreement of 1979, which forbids the establishment of military bases any installations or fortifications. These are the 6 important related treaties and agreements. Now, what is the status of India? What is India's position on them? India being a major spacefaring nation, we are party to Outer Space Treaty, we are party to Rescue Agreement, Liability Convention and Registration Convention. But however, we have signed the Moon Treaty, but we have not ratified it because there is a geopolitical angle when it comes to exploration of the moon. Major spacefaring powers like China, US and even Russia, they have ambitions of establishing human colonies on the moon with potential exploration of mineral resources and harvesting of those resources as well. So keeping that in mind, India has kept its options open by not ratifying the Moon Treaty because it prohibits the setting up of military facilities or installations or fortifications on the moon. Since other spacefaring nations have not ratified it, India also has not ratified it. And we actively participate in the COOPUS meetings whenever it takes place. So let's look at a related topic on Artemis Accords. This is another important topic which has been in the news because last year, India has joined the Artemis missions, which is being led by the United States, by NASA. NASA is returning to the moon after a long time. NASA had suspended its Apollo missions and the Artemis missions through which it had reached the moon during the Cold War period. Due to the higher cost involved, NASA had suspended these programs. But now with the restart of a new space race led by China, US is also competing with China and NASA has restarted the Artemis missions. In 2020, NASA brought out the Artemis Accords with the goal of returning astronauts back to the moon by 2026. NASA hopes to place the first women astronaut, the first person of color, and the first international partner astronaut from a friendly country on the lunar surface. Now, this is where Artemis Accords acquire significance for India. Under this, NASA has committed that it will place an international partner astronaut, that is, astronaut from a friendly foreign partner, which could very well be India. Because India also has focused on its own human spaceflight program, the Gaganyaan mission, where the US is partnering with India. So there is a possibility of ISRO, NASA tying up for human spaceflight program, including a mission to the moon, where possibly an Indian astronaut could be stationed on the moon. So there is a lot of opportunities that lie here. The US has brought like-minded countries together. 42 countries have signed the Artemis Accords in the last 4 years. All right, many European countries, along with India, Japan, and many others, have joined the Artemis initiative led by NASA. Got it? So you can see the member countries over here. You can see some 30 plus member countries. Plus there are some new countries that have joined recently. So totally 42 countries have signed the Artemis Accords. Next, Group of Friends Initiative. What is this agreement? This is an India-led initiative. India, along with Bangladesh, Egypt, France, Morocco, and Nepal, they hold the co-chair of this initiative called Group of Friends, which is aimed at protecting the UN peacekeepers. India is one of the major contributor of troops to UN peacekeeping forces, and we have suffered one of the biggest losses. More than 170, 180 Indian personnel have lost their lives in UN peacekeeping missions. I hope you know UN peacekeepers are also called blue helmets. They play a critical role in conflict zones in maintaining peace and stability. But the concern is that in these war zones and conflict zones, UN peacekeepers have been targeted either by the rebel forces or by the local armed groups, sometimes even by the state forces as well in a conflict zone. So to ensure that whoever kills a UN peacekeeper is held accountable and punished under international law, India has formed this initiative called Group of Friends with the assistance of Bangladesh, Egypt, France, Morocco, and Nepal. India has even provided a software tool called Unite Aware, which will help in situational awareness and intelligence gathering and assessment for the peacekeeping troops. And this is an Indian contribution, the Unite Aware tool. It's an app, it's a digital app that has been developed by India, which we have donated to UN peacekeeping forces. So on the Unite Aware platform, The crimes against UN peacekeepers will also be recorded and tracked to hold the violators responsible and accountable for any killing of UN peacekeepers. 40 member states have joined the initiative, and please note down a very important point. This initiative is in line with the UNSC resolution number 2589. There could be a prelims question based on this. What does UNSC resolution 2589 deal with? Or group of friends initiative is based on which UNSC resolution? So such a question can be asked. It's based on UNSC resolution 2589, which calls for accountability when UN peacekeeping troops are killed in action. So in line with this resolution, India, along with the others, they have set up the Group of Friends initiative to hold those who are responsible for the killing of UN peacekeepers accountable and ensure that they are punished under international law. Next, topic number 9, Climate Promise 2025. This is an initiative of UN Development Program. Please write this down. This was in the news as well. This is the next stage of Climate Promise Initiative. UNDP has been playing a big role with regard to climate action efforts, especially in supporting the developing nations and the poor countries and least developed countries. So through the Climate Promise Initiative, the UNDP is offering support to the developing countries and LDCs to help them achieve their targets under Paris Agreement. Under the 2015 Paris Agreement, countries have voluntarily declared their targets called INDCs or NDCs, nationally determined contributions. So these voluntary contributions, which are announced by all the countries, is supposed to help us achieve the eventual target of the Paris Agreement, which is to keep the global rise in temperature to under 2 degrees and if possible to keep it under 1.5 degrees Celsius. But developing and underdeveloped countries face a big challenge when it comes to adopting clean energy and to make a transition towards a greener economy. So the Climate Promise Initiative of UNDP provides that financial support to developing nations and least developed countries. So this was another important international agreement and initiative that was in the news. Next, Indian Ocean Observing System, Indo-OS. This was an initiative between India and US to monitor the Indian Ocean and to study the oceanic and atmospheric parameters to carry out weather forecasting in the Indian Ocean. This scientific initiative had been stopped because of the COVID-19 pandemic. As part of this joint research initiative, India and US, our Ministry of Earth Sciences, along with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of the US, they had collaborated to install these sensors that are deployed through buoys, flotation buoys, which are deployed across the Indian Ocean to track certain key parameters in the ocean and in the atmosphere to provide weather forecasting and to track the monsoon winds, to study the Indian Ocean dipole, etc. This initiative had taken a hit because these floating and submerged buoys that carry the sensors, they were not maintained during the pandemic period, and as a result, the network of sensors were not functioning. They were malfunctioning. So recently, India, US have restarted the initiative. It was first established in 2006, rolled out in 2008, in collaboration with the RAMA program. RAMA stands for Research Mood Array for African, Asian, Australasian Monsoon Analysis and Prediction. So under RAMA program, all the Indian Ocean littorals are participating to study the Indian Ocean, to keep track of the oceanic parameters and the atmospheric parameters that plays a role in determining the weather of the region. So from Australia to East Africa, to India to Southeast Asia, there are many floating and submerged buoys that are deployed through sensors, which carry sensors on board that help in tracking the temperature levels, the salinity levels, etc., which helps in weather forecasting and weather prediction. So this initiative, which had stopped due to the pandemic, has been restarted. Coming to topic number 11, the Open Skies Treaty. Open Skies Treaty was brought out immediately after the end of the Cold War in 1992. This basically provided some of the European countries and the major global powers, US and Russia, it gave them the right to carry out unarmed aerial surveillance of the territory of the other country so that they could monitor the military deployment and arms development programs of the other country. This was an initiative to reduce the tensions, to reduce an arms race after the Cold War. Because US was worried about Russia's nuclear arsenal. Russia was worried about American arms and nuclear weapons being stationed in Europe, in NATO countries. So to address these tensions in 92, Open Skies Treaty was established that came into effect in 2002. So under this arrangement, the member countries, there are 32 parties to it, they could deploy aircraft, drones, or any aerial platform and fly it through the territory of another country. Of course, after taking the required permissions. They would have to inform all the parties to the Open Skies Treaty that they are going to conduct a surveillance mission. Let's say US suspected Russia of accelerating its nuclear program. The US could certify for itself, it could verify for itself by conducting aerial surveillance as per the provisions of Open Skies Treaty, and Russia would be obligated to allow such a aerial surveillance. So it enabled the monitoring of military activities and arms development and deployment through unarmed aerial surveillance within the member states. Now this topic is very important because recently both US and Russia have withdrawn from the Open Skies Treaty. As tensions escalated between US and Russia, especially over the Ukrainian issue, the US withdrew from the treaty in 2020, and the following year Russia also withdrew, and thus Open Skies Treaty has been in the news. So please note, India is not a member. India is not party to it. Next, topic number 12, International Financial Architecture. What do you mean by the IFA, International Financial Architecture? It refers to the set of institutions, policies, guidelines and rules and frameworks that exist in the financial domain that govern the international financial system. There are certain groups, there are certain institutions, there are certain guidelines and rules as well, which collectively make up the international financial architecture. For example, you have G7 and G20. G7 includes the industrialized nations, US and Canada from North America, UK, France, Germany and Italy from Europe, and Japan, the 7 most industrialized developed countries. Then G20, which includes the top 20 economies of the world, that includes India, right? So they play a pivotal role in determining the financial architecture of the world, in dealing with global economic problems and challenges. Then you have the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF and the World Bank. The World Bank group of institutions, they provide developmental funding. They provide loans, assistance in developmental programs. IMF provides contingency funding to countries that are facing a liquidity crisis or a forex crisis. Then WTO, as we discussed, creates a multilateral level playing field for trade. The BIS, Bank for International Settlements, it lays down monetary guidelines for central banks and thus helps in maintaining monetary stability and liquidity stability. And OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, based out of Europe, headquartered in Paris, which plays a key role in determining the global tax policies and in defining the trade and economic relations, which becomes a standard for the rest of the world as well. So collectively, these groups and institutions, their rules and policies make up the international financial architecture. Now, why is this concept so important? It is important because many countries are pushing for reforms of the international financial architecture. Because some of these institutions are dominated by Western powers. IMF, World Bank, OECD, even BIS to an extent, they're all dominated by the US and European powers. Even at WTO, there is a stark division between developed countries and developing countries. Hence, there is a demand for reforms of these institutions, including the rules and the policies and frameworks to restructure the international financial architecture. So that is why the topic is important. During the recent G20 summit hosted by India, there has been a consultative group set up at the G20 to recommend changes to these institutions, to look at reforms of the international financial architecture. Now let's move on to topic 13, Inclusive Forum on Carbon Mitigation Approaches, IFCMA. This was established as a new forum for climate cooperation by the OECD. The purpose here is to provide for data sharing, provide for sharing of data and information regarding the climate action efforts that are being undertaken around the world. Essentially, it creates a platform for all the developing, underdeveloped countries to come together, share their best experience, share the progress of their climate action initiatives, so that the other countries can learn from each other. So it's a data sharing platform, it's a cooperation and a assistance platform where one country can help the other by taking stock of the progress of their initiatives, by sharing the information. So that is the purpose of this international forum. And I feel it's a important topic. It is an obscure topic, not widely reported in newspapers, but can be relevant for the exam because UPSC tends to focus on such topics sometimes. So last year, the first meeting was held, the inaugural meeting of Inclusive Forum on Carbon Mitigation Approaches was held, and India participated. So it's an initiative of OECD, it's a data sharing platform to build cooperation and coordination and to take stock of climate action initiatives. Next, topic 14, the New START, Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. The new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. This was in the news, right? So there are few static topics related to it, plus there are some current affairs developments. Both can be very important. So this essentially was an arms reduction treaty between US and Russia. Arms reduction treaty between US and Russia signed in 2010 in Prague in Europe, and it entered into force in 2011. It placed obligations on both US and Russia with regard to their nuclear stockpile, the number of warheads they can have, the number of delivery systems they can possess. There have been restrictions and obligations placed on them to prevent a nuclear arms race between them. All right. This was a replacement of the Treaty of Moscow, also called the SORT, Strategic Offensive Weapons Reduction Treaty, that was signed in 1980s, in the late 1980s, during the Cold War period. During the Cold War, US and Soviet Union came very close to the brink of a nuclear conflict, especially during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So following that, through 70s and 80s, there were many arms reduction treaties that were signed. And SORT, or Treaty of Moscow, was one of the most important treaties. It placed restrictions on strategic offensive weapons like nuclear weapons, but it expired in 2012. This was supposed to be replaced by START 1 treaty, which had been signed earlier, but it expired in 2009, and there was no replacement found to START 1. They had negotiated START 2, but it never came into force. They had started talks about START 3, but that never went forward. So New START was seen as a replacement of these arms reduction treaties. Now this topic is very important for us because recently Russia has suspended its participation. Russia has not withdrawn. It is still obligated under the commitments of the New START, but it has suspended its participation. Following the tensions between US and Russia over the Ukraine war, Russia has recently suspended its participation. So the main obligation under New START is to reduce the strategic nuclear missile launches, the delivery systems, by more than 50%. Because both US and Russia collectively possess thousands of warheads and thousands of delivery systems. So the primary goal here is to bring down the delivery systems, the launch systems, by more than half and set up a new inspection verification regime so they can cross-check whether both sides are following the commitments. Next, topic 15, International Code of Safety for Ships for Industrial Personnel, also called the IP Code. It was recently adopted by the International Maritime Organization, which is one of the specialized agencies of the United Nations. See, IMO is responsible for regulating maritime activity, especially commercial shipping. So IMO has adopted a convention called the SOLAS Convention, the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, to protect the seafarers who spend most of their time and work at sea, and also to protect any workers, offshore workers who work in offshore facilities. There is an international convention for safety of life at sea, and all the commercial shipping companies are obligated to implement these safety measures, adopt the basic standards to protect life at sea. The goal is to protect the seafarers, protect anyone who is involved in labor at sea, especially offshore industrial workers. So under this SOLAS convention, a new code has been adopted, the IP code, which is the International Code of Safety for Ships for industrial personnel. So those who are transported through ships for offshore facilities because of their occupation, they get protection. It's like a labor law, essentially. Today we have offshore windmills, oil rigs, and many such industrial projects present on the sea. So the personnel are transported by ships and brought back. So during this journey, the industrial personnel who are being transported, they might face a risk. So to protect their lives, to ensure their safety, this international code has been adopted by the IMO. India has supported this. India is adopting this as well. The topic is very important because it's coming into force at the start of July, 1st July 2024. So basically in 3 weeks, this new IP code protecting industrial personnel at sea will kick into effect. That is why the topic is very important. Next, topic number 16, the UN Convention Against Corruption. Again, an old topic, a static topic, but has been in the news because it's the 20th anniversary. 20 years of UN Convention Against Corruption was marked last year in 2023. So let's look at some basic facts. It was adopted by UN General Assembly in the year 2003 and it came into force in 2005. 190 parties are part of the convention, but only 140 of them have signed and ratified it, and India is one amongst them. So this is the only convention at the global level which is legally binding against corruption, government corruption. So it's a legally binding anti-corruption instrument which pushes governments around the world to implement anti-corruption measures, to tackle bribery, to tackle illicit activities by government officials, by elected leaders and representatives, to ensure that we deal with money laundering, illegal activities, and other corrupt activities that is associated with government corruption. It provides coverage for arms deals, the kickbacks which might be received, the possible international nexus between corrupt politicians and officials in one country and the middlemen in other countries. So all these provisions are part of it. It was negotiated in Vienna in 2003, right? It was signed, brought out in 2003 and finally adopted, came into force in 2005. So since it's been 20 years since the UN Convention on Corruption, right? It's very crucial and India is part of it. It is in line with Sustainable Development Goals as well. Ending corruption, implementing good governance is one of the Sustainable Development Goals. Next, topic 17, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Again, an old static topic, but in the news because 2023 was the 75th anniversary of UN Declaration on Human Rights. The topic is in the news also due to the wars and conflicts that are currently going on. The Russia-Ukraine war, the Gaza conflict, right? So there are allegations of human rights violations against Israel, against Russia. So because of that as well, there could be a question. Plus it was the 75th anniversary last year of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So it was adopted in 1948 by UN General Assembly and it's not legally binding. It basically defines a set of 30 fundamental rights. 30 fundamental rights are defined, which even inspired many constitutions and the fundamental rights that were adopted, including the Indian Constitution. In fact, one member from Indian Constituent Assembly was part of drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The global community was insistent on using the word men as a generic term while drafting the document. It was this Indian member who was part of Indian Constituent Assembly, who was also part of the drafting of UDHR, who recommended a change and use a neutral term. Use a neutral term covering both the genders. Now find out who was this Indian policy maker who was a member of the Constituent Assembly in India, played a role in drafting the Indian Constitution and also helped the UN in drafting the UDHR. Please find out who was this individual and mention the name in the comments. So it defines a set of 30 fundamental rights and they are seen as part of international customary law. It's not legally binding, but it is seen as part of international customary law. So if you combine UDHR with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, collectively you get your International Bill of Human Rights that define human rights around the world. Now, India has adopted a law as well, the Protection of Human Rights Act in 93, through which we have established human rights institutions like NHRC and state human rights commissions. This is in line with our commitment to UDHR and International Bill of Human Rights. So please read a little more about International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. They give a host of rights that promotes liberty, freedom, freedom of speech and expression, right to life. Such critical rights are protected and promoted through the International Bill of Human Rights. Coming to topic 18, the UN Convention on International Tax Cooperation. This is a proposed convention. By 2025, there is a global push being given for an international tax convention. Because I'm sure you know that tax evasion, then paying lower taxes deliberately through fraud has become common practice, especially amongst high net worth individuals, also amongst few corporate companies as well. They often misuse low tax jurisdictions. They try to launder money. They try to push it through round tripping to avoid paying higher taxes. So this is leading to significant loss in tax revenue for many governments. Hundreds of billions of dollars of tax revenue is being lost. And this is crucial for developing countries, underdeveloped countries, because that is how they can fund welfare programs. So that is why there is a call by the global community to adopt a UN convention. So through the initiative of UN General Assembly, recently, a few months ago, a framework convention has been created. A skeletal framework has already been adopted. So under this, negotiations are taking place and the goal is to have a convention in place by June 2025. So if the negotiations go forward under this framework convention on international tax cooperation, by next year we might have an international tax convention that can lay down some basic standards to deal with illicit financing, money laundering, tax evasion, and even recovery of stolen assets. So this could help in increasing the tax income, the tax revenue for governments without compromising their tax sovereignty. Because countries would be very protective of their sovereign right to determine the taxes. So without compromising on the sovereignty of nations, the tax sovereignty of nations, an international convention has been proposed and India has voted in favor of this framework convention. So that is why the topic is very important. Coming to the last but one topic, topic 19, the CTBT, Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. The Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty was in the news, again because of Russia. Russia adopted a bill in its parliament revoking its ratification of CTBT. Now, this is a backstep taken by Russia with regard to nuclear disarmament. This also has the potential to trigger a nuclear arms race and potentially bring back nuclear testing by the nuclear powers. See, to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons, Non-Proliferation Treaty was adopted in 1960s to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons technology. Later, through the Conference on Disarmament, the CD, under the United Nations, a new treaty was brought out called CTBT, Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, that was negotiated from 1994 to 1996, and eventually it was brought out in 1996. This treaty prohibited every country from testing nuclear weapons going forward. It would place a comprehensive ban on all forms of nuclear testing, be it underground nuclear tests or underwater nuclear tests or atmospheric nuclear tests. In any medium, nuclear tests would be prohibited. But for this treaty to come into effect, it required the ratification of 44 countries listed under Annex 2, which are nuclear capable countries, to sign and ratify the treaty. Total of 44 countries were recognized as already possessing nuclear weapons or having the capability, the potential to develop and test nuclear weapons. So these Annex 2 countries listed under Annex 2 of the treaty, these 44 countries, they had to ratify the treaty to come into force. But this has not happened because 8 countries have never ratified it. Is that clear? Which are the 8 countries? China, Pakistan, Egypt, India, North Korea, the United States, Iran, Israel. And now Russia also has joined the list by revoking its ratification. So until recently, 8 countries had not signed or not ratified the CTBT. Now 1 country has joined, which is Russia. You can look at the other Annex 2 states which have signed and ratified the CTBT. But it will not come into force unless and until all the 44 nuclear capable states ratify the CTBT. Now, to ensure that no country will test nuclear weapons and to ensure that there is global capability to detect any kind of nuclear test, the treaty establishes an organization called CTBTO, Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization. Under the CTBTO, there is an international monitoring system and international data center that can not only conduct inspections around the world, but it can also detect nuclear tests. It maintains a network of sensors and technologies to carry out surveillance and monitor any possible nuclear tests. It has deployed sensors in the seas and the oceans to detect underwater nuclear tests. It has highly sensitive seismographs around the world to detect any possible trembling of the Earth's crust triggered by an underground nuclear test. It has sensors including satellite technology to detect any atmospheric nuclear test as well. So CTBTO and the international monitoring system can quickly pick out any nuclear test anywhere in the world. It has maintained a global network. But it will not come into force unless and until all 44 states ratify. So 8 countries have never ratified it, including India. India always wanted to retain the option of testing because China, US and others, including Pakistan, never ratified the treaty. India sees this as discriminatory, just like the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So India has always sworn that we will never ratify NPT and as well as CTBT. So now Russia revoking its ratification is indeed a big development. Now coming to the last topic for today, the 20th topic, the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. Another old topic but was in the news. The UN Convention to Combat Desertification has launched the first ever data dashboard to track land degradation and desertification. This was one of the most important conventions that was adopted in the 1990s following the Rio Earth Summit. I am sure many of you would have heard about the Rio Earth Summit of 1992. It's considered the mother of all environment-related summits. The Rio Earth Summit gave birth to 3 important conventions. One is your Climate Change Convention, the UNFCCC, which is a framework convention on climate change. Then CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity. And the third was UN Convention to Combat Desertification. These 3 were the byproducts of Rio Earth Summit that adopted Agenda 21, which is a set of environmental targets for the 21st century. So since then, this UN Convention is focused on tackling land degradation, desertification, because increased deforestation, then the impact of climate change, global warming, it can lead to greater erosion of soil fertility. It could lead to land degradation, eventually causing desertification, the spread of desert areas, which eventually affects agricultural productivity, leading to droughts, diseases, right? So it can have a huge socio-economic impact. So countering desertification and land degradation is the prime focus of this UN Convention. It has adopted a data dashboard which provides real-time data about ongoing land degradation and desertification. So these were the 20 topics that I wanted to discuss today in complete detail. So I hope it has been a quick revision and I hope you have understood all the 20 topics, and I really hope at least some questions come from here directly in the upcoming prelims. So if you guys have liked the initiative, understood everything, do press the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So tomorrow, let's meet again at 7 p.m. I'm going to discuss some very important reports and organizations. So do join me live at 7 p.m. Till then, take care. Have a good day.